Did you know that some of the hardest places on Earth to reach aren't hidden in a distant jungle or ocean? They're in Europe. We picture Europe as finished. Fully mapped, fully photographed, every coastline crowded, every corner named, but scattered around its edges are rocks, islands, and frozen frontiers so hostile that reaching them can take weeks, cost lives, or simply isn't allowed at all. Fewer than 150 people have ever stood on one of them. For most of us, Google Earth is the closest we will ever get. Welcome to a list of the most impossible to reach places in Europe, ranked from the one you could just barely climb onto, to the frozen edge of the continent that almost no human is ever permitted to see. Number 5 is a volcano, so remote it has no harbor at all. To get off the boat, you don't dock, you gamble. Number 3 is a granite spike alone in the open Atlantic that fewer than 150 people in all of history have ever managed to land on. Number 6 is an entire island of solid ice, where a famous expedition vanished in 1897 and wasn't found for 33 years. And the final place is the northernmost land in all of Europe, a frozen frontier 900 kilometers from the North Pole that you need military permission just to approach. But let's start with number 1, a tiny green island in the North Atlantic with sheer cliffs on every side, a place with no dock, no path, and no way up, except a rope. We begin in the middle of the North Atlantic, in the Faroe Islands, a scattering of 18 green, wind-carved islands halfway between Scotland and Iceland. 17 of them have people living on them. This one does not. This is Litla, and it is the smallest of the Faroes, and the only one with no human residents at all. On Google Earth, it barely looks real. A single dome of green rock rising straight out of a gray sea, less than 1 square kilometer across, often wearing a strange, flat cap of cloud that hovers over its summit like a lid. That summit, called Slaternir, reaches 414 meters, or about 1,350 feet. And here is the problem. From the waterline to the grass, almost the entire island is sheer cliff. There is no beach. There is no harbor. There is no gentle slope where a boat can simply pull in. The rock comes straight up out of the ocean on every side. So how does anyone get on it? The answer is, with great difficulty, and only when the weather is perfect. The island belongs to sheep farmers, and to reach the roughly 200 sheep that graze the summit, they've fixed ropes and chains to the cliffs. Once or twice a year, on a rare calm day, boats sail out towing small rowing skiffs, and around 40 people climb hand over hand up the rock face using those ropes. At the top, they spread into a human chain across the island and drive the sheep into a pen. Then comes the truly strange part. To get the animals back down, the farmers tie their legs, load them into nets 5 at a time, and lower them down the cliff by rope into the waiting boats. There is a darker footnote too. The island once had its own unique breed of sheep, small, black, short-wooled animals descended from Stone Age stock, found nowhere else. In the 1860s, they were hunted and shot to extinction, and replaced with the ordinary Faroese breed you see there now. So Dimun is an island where the only regular visitors arrive by rope, do their work hanging off a cliff, and leave. And even the animals that live there aren't the ones that belong. It's the easiest place on this list to reach, and it still requires a climb most people would never attempt. From the Faroes, we travel northwest, past Iceland, to a point in the freezing ocean where the northernmost piece of Iceland is quietly disappearing. This is Kolbeinsey, a bare, low rock sitting about 105 kilometers or 55 nautical miles off Iceland's northern coast, well above the Arctic Circle. It is the northernmost point of the entire country, and it may not survive your lifetime. Kolbeinsey is one of the only spots where the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the vast underwater seam where 2 of the planet's tectonic plates are tearing apart, actually pokes above the surface. But the sea is winning. 4 centuries ago, in 1616, this island was recorded as roughly 700 meters long. By the early 1900s, it had lost half of that. By 1985, it was down to about 39 meters across. And by 2021, it had shrunk to a splinter of rock only about 20 meters wide and 14 meters long, barely clinging to the waves. Because it sits exactly on Iceland's maritime boundary, this vanishing rock actually matters. Legally, it helps define how far Iceland's waters extend. So, in an attempt to slow the loss and keep a foothold on it, engineers did something almost absurd. In 1989, they poured a concrete helipad onto the top of the island, so helicopters could land and researchers could keep measuring it. The ocean was not impressed. By 2006, nearly half of that helipad had been torn away. By 2010, it had collapsed completely, and the island itself had split into separate skerries, low rocks divided by a few meters of open water. Today, there is nothing to build on and, at high tide, almost nothing to stand on. You cannot really land on Kolbeinsey anymore, because Kolbeinsey is turning back into the sea it came from. It's a place that's becoming impossible to reach not because it's hidden, but because it's running out of time. Now we move to what might be the loneliest object in the entire North Atlantic. Somewhere between Scotland, Ireland, and Iceland, but genuinely close to none of them, a single spike of granite breaks the surface of the open ocean. This is Rockall. And in all of recorded history, fewer than 150 human beings have ever managed to stand on it. Let's talk about how small and how isolated this really is. Rockall rises just 17 meters out of the water, about 56 feet, roughly the height of a 5-story building. Its base is only about 25 meters by 30 meters. The one spot flat enough to actually sit on, a tiny shelf called Hall's Ledge, measures 3.5 meters by 1 1/3, smaller than a lot of bedrooms. And it is out there completely alone. The nearest permanently inhabited land is North Uist, in Scotland, 367 kilometers away. Ireland is over 400 kilometers off. Iceland is 700 kilometers to the north. There is nothing else, just this rock and the Atlantic in every direction. That ocean is the reason almost no one gets ashore. The waves out here are monstrous. In the year 2000, instruments near Rockall measured a wave over 29 meters tall, nearly 100 feet. To land, you have to bring a boat alongside a slick, sloping rock in a heaving swell and jump. According to the club that verifies these things, the total number of authenticated landings in all of history is around 146 people. More people summit Everest in a single morning. And yet, this pointless-looking rock has been fought over for decades. The United Kingdom formally claimed it in 1955, sending a small team by helicopter to cement a plaque to the summit, one of the very last territorial additions to the British Empire. But Ireland has never accepted that claim, and Iceland and Denmark, on behalf of the Faroes, have all pressed competing claims to the seabed around it because whoever owns the waters owns the fish and whatever lies beneath. A few people have even lived on Rockall to prove a point. A former British soldier, Tom McLean, survived 40 days alone on it in 1985, and adventurer Nick Hancock set a record of 45 days in 2014, riding out Atlantic storms in a tiny survival capsule bolted to the rock. Rockall is barely large enough to hold a human being, and 4 nations still argue over it. From Rockall, we head far to the north and east, into the Barents Sea, to an island that sits completely alone in the cold water between mainland Norway and the Arctic archipelago of Svalbard. This is Bjørnøya, Bear Island. It is the southernmost island of Svalbard, and one of the most isolated inhabited places on the entire continent. Bear Island floats out here by itself, about 235 kilometers south of the main island of Spitsbergen, and nearly 400 kilometers north of the Norwegian mainland. It got its strange name back in 1596, when the Dutch explorer Willem Barents and his crew arrived and found themselves in a fight with a polar bear swimming near the ship. The name stuck, even though there's no bear population living there. What lives there instead is almost nobody. The only permanent residents are the 9 staff who run the meteorological and radio station at Herwighamna on the northern coast. 9 people on an entire island in the middle of the Barents Sea. And it is not a welcoming place. Bear Island is famous for some of the worst weather in Europe. It's wrapped in fog on roughly 1 in 5 days in July, and it records the lowest average yearly sunshine anywhere on the continent, under 600 hours of sun a year. Storms roll through constantly. The surrounding waters are rich with fish and seabirds, but treacherous, and there's no real harbor to speak of. Almost the entire island is a protected nature reserve, and there are very few opportunities for an ordinary person to travel there at all. So, Bear Island is a place you can technically point to on the map, a place with a permanent human presence, and still, for all practical purposes, one of the hardest inhabited spots in Europe to ever set foot on. 9 people, endless fog, and a gray sea in every direction. And from here, it only gets more extreme. We stay in the far northern ocean, but now we travel west, into the gap between Iceland and Greenland, to one of the strangest and most dramatic islands Europe possesses. Rising out of the Arctic Sea, black and jagged and often half buried in cloud, is Jan Mayen, and at its northern end stands something remarkable, the northernmost active volcano on the planet. That volcano is called Beerenberg, and it is enormous, 2,277 meters tall, about 7,470 feet, a glacier-covered cone that plunges straight into the ocean. The whole island is only about 55 kilometers long, so Beerenberg utterly dominates it, and it is very much alive. It last erupted in 1985, and back in 1970, an eruption actually added around 3 square kilometers of brand new land to the island. This is not a dead rock. It's a working Arctic volcano, sitting 600 kilometers northeast of Iceland and 500 kilometers east of Greenland, in one of the emptiest stretches of ocean in the northern hemisphere. Nobody lives on Jan Mayen permanently. Its only residents are a rotating crew from the Norwegian Armed Forces and the Meteorological Institute, around 18 people who winter over, roughly doubling to 35 in summer. And getting to them is the hard part, because here is the detail that makes Jan Mayen so brutal to reach. The island has no harbor, none. There is no dock, no pier, no sheltered port where a ship can safely tie up. Vessels have to anchor offshore in the open Arctic swell, and everything and everyone comes ashore by small boat, timed to the waves. You don't arrive on Jan Mayen so much as you gamble on a calm enough moment to scramble off the water. And even if you make it, you can't stay. Setting up a tent or making camp on the island is prohibited. Landing a private aircraft requires advance permission. Visits are typically measured in a few days, sometimes just a few hours, before the weather closes in again. Jan Mayen is a live volcano, guarded by an ocean with no front door. Most travelers will never step foot on it. And the next island is one where the ground itself is made of ice. For our next place, we push to the very edge of Norwegian territory, the easternmost land in the entire kingdom, to an island that is almost not land at all. It's called Kvitøya, which means White Island. And the name is painfully literal, because there is almost nothing here but ice. Kvitøya sits at the far eastern end of the Svalbard archipelago, so remote that the nearest Russian Arctic island lies just 62 kilometers to the east. It covers about 680 square kilometers, and nearly the entire surface is buried beneath a single, smooth dome of glacier called Kvitøya. From above, on satellite imagery, it looks like a blank white pancake dropped into the polar sea. No valleys, no forests, no towns, just a curved sheet of ice with a few tiny patches of bare rock peeking out at the corners, each only a couple of square kilometers in size. It is one of the most featureless, forbidding pieces of land in all of Europe, and it is guarded by drifting pack ice that keeps ships away for most of the year. But Kvitøya is famous for one haunting reason. In 1897, 3 Swedish explorers, Salomon André, Nils Strindberg, and Knut Frankel, tried to reach the North Pole by hydrogen balloon. It was a disaster. The balloon came down on the pack ice, and the 3 men spent months trekking south across the shifting Arctic, hauling their supplies until they finally reached solid ground, the ice-covered southwest corner of Kvitøya. And there, in the autumn of 1897, all 3 of them died, most likely within about 2 weeks of arriving, in a place so remote that no rescuer could ever find them. And no one did, for 33 years. It wasn't until 1930 that a passing seal hunting ship stumbled onto their final camp and found their remains, along with their diaries and even rolls of photographic film, frozen and preserved by the Arctic cold. When the film was developed, it produced photographs the men had taken during their final march. Images from inside a doomed expedition recovered a third of a century later. That is the kind of place Kvitøya is. An island that is essentially one giant block of ice, so hard to reach that a group of people could vanish on it completely and stay lost for a generation. Now we return toward Iceland for the most restricted place on this list so far, and one of the youngest pieces of land on the entire planet. Most islands are older than human history. This one is younger than color television, and almost no living person is allowed to set foot on it. Its name is Surtsey, and you can point to the exact moment it was born. On the 14th of November, 1,963 fishermen off Iceland's southern coast noticed smoke on the horizon. It wasn't a ship on fire, it was the ocean itself erupting. A volcano was breaking the surface from 130 meters below the waves, and over the next 3.5 years, until it finally went quiet in June of 1967, it built an entirely new island out of lava and ash, rising 170 meters above the sea. Scientists got to watch a piece of land come into existence from nothing, and they understood immediately what they were looking at, a perfectly clean laboratory. Here was a brand new, sterile island that no plant, no animal, no human had ever touched, a chance to watch life arrive and colonize bare rock in real time. So they made a decision that still holds today. To keep it pristine, Surtsey was declared off limits. It was protected while the eruption was still going, and today only a small handful of scientists are ever permitted to land. Everyone else, every tourist, every photographer, every curious sailor, is banned. The closest an ordinary person can get is a small plane passing overhead. In 2008, it was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And the rules are enforced with a seriousness that sounds almost comic, until you understand why. Researchers watched the first plant take root in 1965. By 2008, nearly 70 plant species had appeared, birds had begun nesting, and seals had started breeding on its shores. The whole scientific value depends on nothing being introduced by humans. So when a single tomato plant was once discovered growing on the island, sprouted from a scientist's improperly handled human waste, it was hunted down and destroyed because it didn't belong. When some boys from a nearby island planted potatoes as a prank, those were dug up too. Surtsey is a place kept deliberately, almost obsessively, empty. It's not impossible to reach because of storms or distance. It's forbidden, sealed off on purpose, so that one of the only truly untouched places on Earth can stay that way. For our final place, we travel to the absolute top of the map, as far north as the continent goes, to a frozen archipelago that most people don't even know is part of Europe. This is Franz Josef Land, and on one of its islands lies a cape that is, quite literally, the end of the continent, the northernmost land in all of Eurasia. Franz Josef Land is not one island, but a scattered cluster of 192 of them, spread across 16,000 square kilometers of the Arctic Ocean, roughly 260 kilometers east of Svalbard, and it is a world made almost entirely of ice. About 85% of the entire archipelago is buried under permanent glacier. At its far northern tip, on Rudolph Island, is Cape Fligely. Stand there, and there is no land anywhere between you and the North Pole, which is only about 900 kilometers away. This is the frozen doorstep of the Arctic, and it is the northernmost ground you can stand on in the Eastern Hemisphere. The human history here is one of pure hardship. The islands were only discovered by accident in 1873, when an Austro-Hungarian expedition led by Julius von Payer and Karl Weyprecht became trapped in the drifting pack ice and were carried, helplessly, into an unknown land they named after their emperor, Franz Josef. No one has ever built a lasting settlement here. In its entire history, Franz Josef Land has never had a permanent civilian population, only rotating military personnel and scientists, dropped into an environment that is dark for months, frozen almost year-round, and hostile in nearly every way a place can be. And even if you could survive it, you're very likely not allowed to go. The Soviet Union annexed the archipelago in 1926 and turned this whole corner of the Arctic into a closed military frontier, sealed off from foreigners through the entire Cold War. Today, it sits inside the Russian Arctic National Park, established in 2012, and reaching it means navigating both a wall of drifting sea ice and a wall of permits and government restrictions, a border zone at the top of the world. Franz Josef Land is the northernmost land in Europe, a place 90% buried in ice, with no towns, no permanent people, and no easy way in for anyone. It is in every sense the frozen edge of the continent, and for almost every person alive, Google Earth is genuinely as close as they will ever get. What's strange about this whole list is how it breaks the story we tell ourselves about Europe. We think of it as the finished continent, completely explored, completely reachable, no blank spaces left. And yet, here they are. A green island you can only climb with a rope, a rock crumbling back into the Atlantic, a granite spike almost no one has ever touched, an island of solid ice that swallowed an expedition for 33 years, and a frozen frontier at the top of the world that you need permission from a government just to approach. Some of these places are impossible to reach because of distance, some because of danger, and some simply because we've decided no one is allowed. But all of them are Europe, the parts of it that were never really conquered at all. So out of all of these, which one would you most want to see with your own eyes, if you could actually get there? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, check out my videos on the most impossible to reach islands and mountains on Google Earth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.